In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in black and white emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Tonight, before we bring out our incredible guests, I want to take a moment, as I always do on America in Black and White, to honor the giants who walked before us, to reflect on the shoulders we stand on, to remember that Black excellence is not a trend, it is a tradition. And today, we celebrate a man whose music shook continents, defined empires, and reminded the world that people cannot be silenced, not when they have a trumpet. His name is Hugh Masekela, born on April 4th, 1939 in the township of Witbank, not known as a Malalini in South Africa. He left this earth on January 23rd, 2018 in Johannesburg at the age of 78. But the music he made, the movement he built, and the move he poured into every note lives forever. The world knew him simply as Hugh Masekela, widely and reverently called the father of South African jazz. Hugh grew up during one of the darkest periods in South African history, the brutal reign of apartheid, a system designed to crush the spirit, strip the identity, and silence the voice of Black people. But no system, no matter how violent, no matter how powerful, can silence music that comes from the soul. At just 14 years old, a young Hugh was handed his first trumpet by Archbishop Trevor Hiddleston, the beloved anti-apartheid chaplain who believed that art was a form of liberation. That single trumpet changed everything. Hugh didn't just learn an instrument, he led a revolution. His schoolmates rallied around him, and together they formed the Huddleston Jazz Band, the first youth orchestra in the history of South Africa. And when the great Louis Armstrong himself heard about this remarkable young band across the ocean, he was so moved that he gifted Hugh one of his own personal trumpets. That is the kind of spirit Hugh Masekela carried from the very beginning. In 1960, at just 21 years old, Hugh was forced to leave his homeland. South Africa's apartheid government was tightening its grip. He departed into exile, an exile that would last 30 years. 30 years away from the land he loved, the people he cherished, the soil that shaped him. He made his way to New York City, where he enrolled at the Manhattan School of Music and immersed himself in a golden era of jazz, watching legends like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk perform nightly, learning from Dizzy Gillespie and sharpening the unique Afro jazz sound that should become his signature. And then the world took notice. In 1967, Hugh Masekela stepped onto the stage of the Monterey Pop Festival alongside Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Otis Redding, not as a curiosity, not as a novelty, but as a peer, as a giant. 1 year later, in 1968, his infectious, life-affirming instrumental single, Grazing in the Grass, shot to #1 on the American pop charts. A Black South African man living in exile from a country that tried to erase him had the #1 song in the United States of America. Let that sink in. But Huma Sekula never let fame pull him away from purpose. His music was always more than music. It was a weapon against apartheid and a celebration of African joy. Songs like Soweto Blues captured the grief of a people massacred for demanding their freedom, and Bring Him Back Home, Nelson Mandela, became a rallying cry heard around the entire world. A song that helped shift global consciousness toward the liberation of South Africa's greatest son. Over his extraordinary career, Hugh collaborated with some of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Miriam Makeba, his former wife and kindred spirit in the fight for freedom, Paul Simon on his landmark Graceland tour, the incomparable Fela Kuti, Harry Belafonte, Stevie Wonder, and Marvin Gaye. He released more than 40 albums spanning 5 decades. In 2004, he published his compelling autobiography, Still Grazing, The Musical Journey of Huma Sekula, book that Vanity Fair described by saying, "You'll be in awe of the many lives packed into one." And in June 2010, Huma Sekula opened the FIFA World Cup kickoff concert in South Africa, the first World Cup ever held on African soil. He had come full circle. The man who left in exile returned to open the world's greatest celebration on the continent he never stopped loving. Brothers and sisters, Huma Sekula's story is our story. It is the story of what happens when talent meets purpose, when pain is transformed into power, when a people refuse to be silent. He played his trumpet, not just as an instrument, but as a declaration. We are here. We have always been here, and we're not going anywhere. As we move through this episode, talking about Black entrepreneurship, mental health, community, and identity, let the spirit of Huma Sekula remind us our excellence is not new, our resilience is ancient, and every time we build something, heal something, teach something, or speak truth to power, we're playing our own version of Hugh's trumpet. We are carrying the song forward. Let me introduce our wonderful guest. Our guest is Mr. Michael Allen Chest. He's been here before. And tonight, this phenomenal man has got a lot that we're going to be sharing here in this next episode. Michael is a man who is doing the real work. We're talking about a certified life coach, a licensed therapist, a published author, an entrepreneur, a speaker, and a community advocate, all wrapped into one extraordinary human being. You may know him as Professor C. His real name is Alan Michael Chest, and what he's building in the mental health space in the world of Black entrepreneurship is nothing short of revolutionary. We're going to get into his story, his passion, his books, his business, and his blueprint for healing our community. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Allen Chest. Hello, sir. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you now.
Oh, perfect. How are you?
I am just excellent. How are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
Well, I appreciate you for being back.
Absolutely.
And is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before we get into the show?
Just thank you all for having me here again. It is a pleasure to speak about my experiences, especially as it relates to empowerment, creativity, and also mental health. That I'm passionate about where these areas in my life have aligned and created what I'm calling the mental movement, and my mission as Professor C to reach the people, empower others to find their unique voices and make an impact in marginalized communities.
Yes, sir. And the place that I would love to start, is where we get to, your education and psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So can you walk us through your academic journey from your earliest days in school to earning your advanced degrees in psychology and counseling? And what was that path like?
Yeah. So I am the oldest of six children. I have three brothers and two sisters. Growing up, an 80s baby, but being raised in the 90s, I think it was a different time compared to now. So I think for my upbringing was right before cell phones and internet became a thing. When AOL used to make that crazy sound when you plugged it into the wall. So a little bit before all the technology and things we have now. I'm still a part of the generation that remembers payphones and all of those things. And I think that offers a unique lens that you come from a time where you were the in between, that you know what it was like before all this technology, and now you know what it's like to utilize technology and what we do. So, back then, not having cell phones and things, old school, writing things down on paper was beneficial at the time. I come from healthcare on both sides of my family. So I would say that for me being the oldest, there was certainly a high expectation for me to succeed, and kind of be that example, at least as it relates to education. I've always been called bright or ahead of my time, gifted, terms that were kind of used back then for kiddos like me that were very unique. I think that I've always kind of been a forward, progressive thinker, even at a young age. My mom said that, my dad said that. Just the terms used is very smart or old soul, right? These types of things that were used to describe kids of that time. So through that lens, recognizing that very early on, I took a liking to language, words, even as early as like 6, 7 years old, writing my first poem called Why that I wrote when I was 6.5, 7 years old, I believe. That poem won a national poetry competition in the United States at that time, and I was 7 years old. So I was always pretty, again, just pretty much advanced, I would say, just in terms of my intellectual capacity. Through that, I was held to a high standard. I'll just say that. It was a different time. I was held to a very high standard. It was expected that I would be bringing home honor roll, right? A, B's, and if you were gonna bring home a C, it better be one. But you better make it up, right? So it was like you had to have A's and B's. The goal has always been A's, right? But that if you had a B or two, like that's okay. But we want to get all A's. If you have a C, that's all right. But we can't get anything below that. So I think that the standard was set very high for me from a very young age and kind of leading up into my education. Through that, I think that discipline certainly helped me to be able to master a lot of things at a very young age. So being able to be trained in multiple disciplines, not just education, but singing, creative writing, piano, dancing, all these things simultaneously happening as I'm pursuing like higher education and wanting to bring home that honor roll report card. So I would say my mom wanted us to get uh, a more of a quality education that we can get than we could get at the time from Faraday, Louisiana versus like Springfield, Massachusetts. I think Massachusetts obviously is known for education and healthcare. So her having us move there when I was about, I want to say 10 or 11, we were able, that was back in like 2000, somewhere around there. But I would say Massachusetts certainly was the place for me in terms of my development. It certainly matched my advancement in thinking for sure. And I've had a lot of opportunities to be involved in different types of things as it relates to education in Massachusetts, being a part of different like poetry clubs and academic groups, often serving as like the leader in multiple environments in college. Like I was the co-director of the Westfield State So Seductive Step team. I was the editor-in-chief of Prism Magazine. I was the co-director of the Westfield State Poetry Slam team. I was a member of the Night Owls a cappella group. I was a singer and a pianist for the Westfield State Urban Education Gospel Choir. I was doing all of this at the same time while I was maintaining a full-time education at Westfield State University. Also taking on creating a group that I called the movement at the time. Well, I hope we can get to speak about the movement because that's where the mental movement comes from. But the movement at the time was really about fighting against adversity and kind of being a voice for people of color on a predominantly white campus, and some of the things that we experienced when I was in school. So certainly things that I would hope we would get the chance to talk about. But I feel like because I had so much expectation on me to be great, I did not disappoint. I would say that I certainly doubted myself, sure, a lot of times, feeling like, do I have what it takes, kind of having those things kind of creep into your head, but also realizing that beyond it being things that I hope to accomplish for myself, it is for the community that, I'm here for, not just for me, but for other members of my family and my ancestors who have paved the way for me to sit in this seat and talk on this show tonight.
I got to tell you, that's fascinating that, especially as a young adult, that you were able to do that many things, but that many things contributed to you
Mm-hmm.
being the outstanding individual that you are today. Can you tell us, like, as you were going through those things, to get to where you are today, can you tell us, like, what was the main driving point? What was the one thing that you kept in your mind that kept you so inspired and motivated to do all those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that because I grew up with helpers as family members, like my father, my mother, my grandmothers on both sides, I think that I had a spirit of wanting to help others, wanting to empower others, because I was able to realize at a very young age that I had many people over the years pouring into my cup and not realizing exactly why they were doing that necessarily. But having like these mentors over the years, I think in some regard I would call them earth angels, right? That people that kind of know what your path is meant to be, and you're still trying to catch up and figure it out. I think me being able to succeed was my way to pay homage to those who believed in me and wanted me to see the same things that they saw from a very young age. I certainly went through a lot of doubt, feeling different at times, or like I didn't really necessarily fit in, because I was really ahead of the curve, in a lot of regards. So I think that definitely made me feel isolated at times, or like I didn't feel like I could relate. So what it did offer me was the opportunity to lead. So if I was the odd duck out, I wasn't necessarily sitting at anyone else's table. I was creating the table, and I was offering people to come sit at the table that I cultivated on my own, because I found in my mind that there was a different path to go. Some people say go to A, go to B, and I'm like, no, I'm going to create a new letter in the alphabet. That is the way that I've kind of thought in life, um, that we don't necessarily need to think within a straight line or try to fit into a box that we were never necessarily designed to fit in. I believe, with all these things, that so very often people want you to check off a box. You're right at this, you're right or that. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna be this and I'm gonna be that, right? So that I decide my identity, and I think that is what it's rooted in, right? That my identity is rooted in going against the grain and creating my own path, not because I want to necessarily shake up foundations or systems, but I want to be that person to show others that there's always another way, despite what people might tell you.
Well, so what specifically drew you to psychology as a discipline? Was there a course, a professor, a book, or a personal experience that locked you in?
Yeah. So I would say, I think I mentioned this on the first show we had. So whoever hasn't seen that one, please go back and watch part one. This is part two.
Mhm.
But what I believe I had said then was that I didn't want to go to college initially, right? But remembering that I did have the potential, but I was just really kind of hyper focused on music for a lot of it. I was doing all these things, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm still gonna be a musician. I'm still gonna get this record deal. Like that's the goal. Like AM the singer. That was all I wanted to be. It's like, yeah, people are saying I'm smart. People say I can do this and that, but it's singing. It's music. That's me. But having the urban education program at Westfield State University, it was called the urban education program. It's now called the Lead Scholars program at Westfield State University, which was a program dedicated to recruiting individuals such as myself, children of students of color or students from rural or urban areas to have the opportunity to participate in that academic boot camp over the summer to prove that you had what it takes to matriculate into the school year as a full-time student. So I believe having those peer counselors, we have other students higher up that went through the same process that we were getting ready to go through. It was a very intensive academic process. I'll tell you that it was very tough, and they expected nothing less than excellent. There was no room for error. And we knew that, right? We knew what they made it very clear what we were signing up for. That if you're deciding to come into this program, that we're expecting excellence. Like there is no other way, right? So that was the mission, that we were going to show these kids that they can be excellent and that they can thrive in areas that people often believe that they are not capable of thriving in. So having other students that had gone through this intensive academic boot camp of Westville State gave me hope that I could do the same thing. And some of the other people that came in with me. Was it easy? Absolutely not. It was certainly hard. But it was motivational to see that even when we thought we were like falling behind, we had these other these peer counselors, they were called peer counselors, picking us up. It's just a bad day. You got this. You're going to get to that finish line. I think that the way that the program was designed to have other students who had already gone through the process actually stay in the dorms with us and work us through the steps of getting through that 6-week intensive programming was the best thing that they could have done. Because they knew the struggle. They came from our areas. They came from the hoods and the ghettos, and all the things, whatever people want to call it. They came from areas that we came from. They knew what we were up against, and they knew that there were people believing that we weren't going to be able to make it through that intensive 6-week academic program. So when I did make it through, I wanted to get back, and I became a peer counselor every single summer after that. Leading up to graduation, I still came back, and I was part of the residential team for the peer counselor. So I stayed on. I was loyal to the cause. Joan Fuller, I mentioned, who was the director at the time that I was in the program, her saying was each one reach one, each one teach one. And that is rooted. That is rooted in some of the adversity that people of color have faced, right? People trying to tell the story for us, people trying to tell us who we are or label us, and me kind of fighting against that to say, you're not going to tell my story for me. That's my role. So wanting to give back to others in that way kind of sparked an interest in me helping other people. Little side hobby, being interested in astrology too. Gemini match with Aquarius and Libra. That's my family right there for the air signs. But that combined with wanting to help people fight against adversity and really kind of owning their identity and really empowering others really drove home me wanting to get into psychology. That, and then we had some losses in our family. My mom's youngest brother, we had lost. Tragic loss there that definitely prompted me to want to pursue mental health further. Prior to becoming a psychologist, becoming in psychology, I was a program supervisor. They made me a program supervisor at 24 years old. So you got to imagine.
Wow.
I started working for the Key program when I was 22. I think that was back in 2012, somewhere around there. And they thought I had what it takes. But within the first 6 months, I was a shift supervisor. I was up for program supervisor after the 6 months, but it was me against someone who had already been there a little bit longer. So there's an obligation to kind of put that person in the role. A few months after, they gave me my own program. 24 years old, young Black kid, from the hood, right? Being this program, we think that you can be the program supervisor. Like, you're going to be in charge of overseeing this home of at-risk youth. You're going to have these staff members that you have to train. You have to hire, train, fire if necessary. You're training them in everything, how to provide care. You're making sure that the kids have what they need. You're also tending to the staff members' needs. You're doing disciplinary action. So I was young. I was very young in that role. And same thing entered my head. Is this imposter syndrome? Why did they choose me? What did they see in me? But I got over that very quickly and realized that, that's exactly where God wanted me to be. Because what was deemed one of the worst programs in that region became one of the best programs in the regions under my watch. So I've never been a quitter. I will say that. I've never been a quitter. I've never allowed someone to kind of define me or think that they got me pinned down in a box or backed up against the wall. If you think that, you're sadly mistaken. So I've always been that type of person, for sure. So that has driven my passion. I'm passionate about helping others. I certainly don't like bullies, people um, trying to minimize someone's identity or what they have to offer to this world.
You know, being so young and you having that much motivation and inspiration, being, being the youngest in that program to be a director slash manager,
Mhm.
um, and going through that whole phase. I mean, did this make you feel that much more comfortable about psychology? Because it seems like, at this point, that now you're pretty much going to be, the world is going to open up to you where you've got a whole lot coming to you. So, how did that make you feel and how did you deal with that?
I think I think in the beginning a lot of prayer. There was a lot of nights that I went home like asking myself, "What am I doing?" Because I think that the doubt creeps in, but that's just the devil. I feel that or some force trying to tell you that you're not good enough. So I say don't listen to those voices that tell you that you're not good enough. So I think I tell my clients all the time too, or anyone listening, that when you hear those negative voices coming in, you need to combat that with positive thinking. For every negative thought, you need to think six positive things just to combat that one negative thing. So it shows you that the power of the negative mind is definitely impactful if you allow it to be. But you have to continue to show up for yourself. So for me, remembering that I was chosen for a reason. I proved that I have the skill set to do this. And when I reflect on my life, nothing has ever been easy for me. Nothing has ever been easy for me. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, that it's a fight every single day. It's when you think that it's not a fight that you need to reevaluate, because if you think that there's ever a chance where we get the opportunity to become comfortable or complacent, I would say absolutely not. I would say that it's something that we have to continue to work at, as a community. But people like me who are on the forefront, I want to serve as an example to show other people who come from where I come from that you can do the exact same thing that I did, if not better. Anyone who's coming after me, I want you to be better than me. I will actually give you the tools to be better than me, because it's about helping generations continue to build the momentum for change, right? So when I'm gone, I need someone else to pick up that mantle, right? We need to continue showing up for each other, pass the baton to the next sister or brother who's trying to make an impact in this country, and just in mental health altogether, especially surrounding the stigma that we have, lack of trust for people who are in these roles, who can misdiagnose or not be culturally competent, understand traditions and rituals that exist within marginalized communities. I think it's very important that the power of education is everything. So I need to be a force to help make sure that things are being handled with care, not just care, but quality care.
So in this point, from the psychological perspective, uh, can you tell us a little bit as to what are some of the findings, understandings, and disciplines and studies that
Oof.
you have come to the conclusion of reading when it comes to psychology, mental health, and underserved marginalized communities, in particular Black communities?
Yes. Thank you for bringing this up. So when I was in grad school, we had to pick a topic to write about, and the topic that I wrote about that I'm hoping to use for my dissertation moving forward, I'm going to publish as a research paper, is the stigma of therapy within Black and Brown communities. That was very dear to my heart because I believe that in Black and Brown communities, there is an emphasis on keeping things in the home because of there's a cultural mistrust to disclosing things happening within your family to people who don't look like you in your family. That how can you possibly disclose something that's happening within a system that you have already recognized is designed to keep you down? Um, the systems in Black and Brown communities aren't designed for success. They really aren't. So think about all these different types of supports that are put into place, right? But, you know, who's monitoring these supports in a way that is thinking progressive? You know, this is the support you have right now, but the hope is to get you to not needing this support for as long as you need it. And there's no one to care about that, right? So it's like if you're getting government support, let's keep you getting that support, because and let's make you believe that that's the only thing that you're capable of getting, and that you can't step outside of that support provided by the government to do something different, right? So systems are designed like that, even in education. You know, there are pros and cons to, you know, kids going up a grade or kids being retained. I see both sides of it, but I think what makes me feel uncomfortable is if we have children moving on to the next grade that have not cultivated the skills to succeed in the next grade by saying, "Oh, we're just gonna increase the grade by 3 points and give them a passing grade so they can go on to the next grade, just so that the same thing could continue to happen over and over and over and over and over and over and over again." That is a system, right? If we keep adjusting the scale so this kiddo keeps passing, then we're not tending to the fact that they are missing skills. So by the time that kid is in 12th grade, they're feeling hopeless. But what have I learned? How can I apply what I've learned to real life circumstances or experiences? And because you don't have that education, now you're looking for other means of survival, right? So what's considered delinquency, truancy, and all these other things, in some regard, this is this kiddo's way of trying to survive because they have not been taught the necessary skills to survive any other way.
You know, as you mentioned, system programs and, you know, what it's set up to do and how it actually catches people and put them in a box. Um, you know, give me your philosophy and your thought processes as to a system apparently that's put in place to set these communities up for failure, but then you come right back and you want to vilify them at the same time.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of that?
I think that it is a setup to prison pipelines. That if these students don't have the skills that they need and their family is starving, they're trying to survive, and they don't know any other way to try to get to make ends meet, and they're just doing what the best that they can do. I think it was designed that way. If the system was designed for you to fail, how can you overcome it? If you depend on also that system to survive in some aspect through government assistance. So it's like, I'll give you a breadcrumb. This is all you're going to get. I know this is not enough. I know you're going to do something different to try to survive. That it is a perpetual cycle of the same stuff over and over and over again. It even exists in academics in terms of testing, right? So this came up in my psychology classes as well. That, you know, in some regard, if you think about the tests that students are expected to take of color, you ask a kid to answer a question about being on a beach in Malibu. That kid can't answer that question about being on a beach in Malibu because that's not his reality. His family's nowhere on the beach in Malibu. So how possibly can he understand that question first and foremost? He's going to look at that question like that question has three heads. What are you talking about? My family don't know what it's like to be on a beach in Malibu, and I'm not sure how much money you're going to pay to get the Malibu with the Malibu drink with the straw. That's not my reality. So it had attention to detail. I'm very detail oriented, and I believe that, you know, when we have tests, when we academically, all these things, we need to really tailor to the experiences of the people who are coming into our care, not what we believe they could accomplish. Because yes, we can say that, but if they can't see that in front of them, they're not going to believe that to be true, right? So for me, I feel like I'm always meeting people where they're at, because I understand what it's like not to have. I understand what it's like to be labeled, to be accused of things, everything under the sun, you know. So I feel that, especially in education, this is where we can do a lot of work, right? That on one hand, you want the education to match the experience of the students that are learning. On the second hand, you want to make sure that you're attending to their social and emotional needs as well. Because I don't expect a student who's coming to class depressed to get an A on a test. Does that make them a bad student? Or did I assess where they were at emotionally before I handed them this test? So I think what we're seeing now, especially now in schools, is that there's a strong social emotional component to making sure that we are attending to their needs in that that area, you know, because the mind, the emotion, and the action, the body, all that stuff works together as a unit, as a car. You can have a strong engine, but the car does not move without its tires. So if you're just focusing on the academic aspect of the child and not focusing on everything else that's going on with the child, that's only half the picture, right? So I think that so much has gone on for so long and people have been afraid to speak on these things. I am not that. You know, I will speak on every single thing that I've seen as concerns. And I do believe that education is a big concern with how it's being put out to the youth.
Well, when you mentioned the testing and so forth, because I've always wondered, it's not the same for all students, but
Mm-hmm,
when we talk about especially standardized testing,
mm-hmm,
it's been historically known to be racially biased.
mm-hmm,
And so when you come from an underserved and marginalized community, sometimes not all, but some people kind of struggle, when it comes to taking these tests, with tests being set that way,
mm-hmm.
because they've never changed. Um, what are some of the things you're hearing as far as some of your peers as to how they're actually going to change this? Is it going to change? When will it
Mm-hmm.
change? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, great question. I think that so many of us in the field are wearing multiple hats. Like we're not just a therapist, we're the coach, we're the teacher, we're the parent advocate. I think we realize that we have to be those things. So even me, case in point, right? I didn't just settle for a licensed school adjustment counselor, licensed therapist in psychology. I said, no, I want to be in the schools too. I want to put my hat in every single race to support these students and people in general, right? If I have that skill of being detail oriented to catch the small things, then I need to have a seat at every single table to make sure that I can advocate for people who can't advocate for themselves. So you're noticing that when you look at the credentials of therapists, you're seeing a licensed mental health counselor, a school adjustment counselor. You have therapists that are also social workers. You have therapists that are also teachers. So it's like I think in general, I think that because mental health is at an all-time high, I can speak confidently and say that I'm not the only one thinking this, but therapists would believe that we have to take on this role. We realize that sometimes what we do has to extend beyond just the traditional therapy model where clients come into your office and they're laying on a couch and you have your notepad and you keep asking them why, what, who over and over and over again. Like it has to be deeper than that. So when I'm meeting with my clients and their kids, especially, I am going to have a session, but I'm also going to have a parent meeting. I'm going to have a school meeting. I'm going to have any meeting I need to have to make sure that they're getting the support that they need across every area of functioning, not just academically, socially, physically. I want to know that they're they're thriving all of those particular areas. So I think that having a type of vigilance, so to speak, is important in this day and age to make sure that things aren't getting missed or pushed aside or being minimized as if it's not important because it's not the majority's concern.
Mm. So, as a Black man pursuing advanced degrees in psychology, did you ever feel like an outsider in academic spaces? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think that people believe, I don't know if all people believe this, but let me just say this. There's no peachy road for a person of color who's achieving a higher education. Some of it has to do with the fact that a lot of times you are one of two Black people on a predominantly white campus if you don't go to a historically Black college or university, right? So I didn't go to like a Howard or anything like that. I went to a predominantly white college in Massachusetts where I was one of two in the class, which was a culture shock. I think to some degree, it is a culture shock when you're sitting in these classes because by default, you have to be the voice for everyone who looks like you. That is a lot of responsibility. When you walk into a classroom and you see that you are one of two, and you are one of two who can speak to your experience, and there are 25 to 30 other people in that class who look nothing like you. So with that, there's an added pressure. Um, a part of me recognizes that was going to be the case anyways, right? Because it was difficult to matriculate into the campus. It was not easy. And I think it was designed that way because the leaders that recruited us knew what we were going to be up against. So as much as it's about intellectual capacities, it's about how can you handle your emotional responses when you are in these spaces with majority not looking like you, and a different type of microaggressions that can come up. Okay. It's not always direct on a campus. It might be sly, right? So I think about situations that have happened to me where, being one or two in a class full of Caucasian Americans, white people, where the teacher is having everyone in the class say, tell me where you're from. I want to know about your family history. And people can say, oh, well, my family's French, or my family's from Russia or Australia, whatever, you name it, right? And then get into the Black people, and we're like, well, we know that we're African American. And then the response not being, well, okay, it's really, you don't know which African tribe you're from. So things like that, right? It's not necessarily in your face, but it's in your face. So just little things. Or, you're walking with your friends and someone walks past you and your friends that don't look like you and your friends, and they're like, the moment, the music, you better never let it go. Right? So having those experiences, I think, so for me, the way that I respond to that particular situation is I'm going to say, hello, my name is Alan Michael Chess. Because you're not going to use, yes, I love that song, right? We all love that song, duh. But you're not going to use that as a way to try to kind of frame my background or who I come from, that, we're all about like hardcore rap music and stuff like that. We can do that, and we can still be scholars in the academic settings. So I think, kind of experiencing that really lit my fire to be able to sit in this seat and be a voice for someone who's experienced those types of adversities, especially on a college campus. You will see it not directly in your face, right? But little comments, little undertones of discrimination, racism, microaggressions, things like that kind of come up over the years, which led to me creating the movement when I was in Westfield State.
Wow. So how has your formal training in psychology and counseling directly shaped the way you approach your work with clients, entrepreneurs, and communities?
Yeah. So what I studied in college, grad school, was a trauma track. Obviously, for me, trauma resonates with me because I believe that because there is this stigma of therapy within Black and Brown communities that we don't seek back then. We did not seek out therapy. It was not something that we did, right? We handle things within the house. So I think me wanting to kind of shift that lens, I realized that there was importance for someone like me who was pursuing a higher education to be in that seat to where I could study trauma. Trauma being like the most impactful thing I've studied in my psychology program was trauma. And then secondary to trauma, some of the other things like family systems, and what other things would be like violence in communities, things like that, things that impact people of color. I was really attuned to when I was in my programming. So trauma combined with my training in DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. DBT was created by Marsha Linehan, Dr. Marsha Linehan, the creator of DBT, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, right? She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she ended up becoming a doctor and creating one of the most prominent treatment modalities utilized in therapy, DBT, right? What I love about DBT and how that connects to trauma is that DBT is action-oriented. What we see with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is that there's a lot of focus on what's happening in the mind, right? The thoughts, because it's believed that the thoughts create emotions or feelings that then create actions. The actions oftentimes being impulsive behavior, doing a behavior that's going to lead to some type of pain, suffering, or consequence, right? So with DBT, we take it a step further and say, yes, we recognize these thoughts, but we want to build some skills, some action-oriented steps that we can take to try to decrease the intensity of an emotion that one might be feeling at any given moment or time. And I think that resonates with me, especially in my work with trauma and individuals, because oftentimes individuals do have intense emotions and they don't know where to put them. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to make sense of it. So for me, we're going to slow it down. Let's slow this train down a little bit to get to the root of where this is. If we can name it, if we can rate the intensity of it, we can figure out how to decrease that number. I always say that, you know, my work is never to be a fixer. It's about guiding. So I'm going to show you the tools, but it's up to you to use those tools that's going to cultivate that change you need to feel better and to minimize the emotional suffering that you're experiencing at any given time. So that resonates with me, with my communities that I'm a part of, the adversities that I've faced in my career and just in my upbringing, educational journey of getting to this point.
In your clinical experience, what are the most common psychological and emotional struggles you've seen surface among Black men and women in America?
Yep. What I see is lack of a sense of belonging. Always kind of feeling like the cards are stacked against you. I take two steps forward to get knocked 6 steps back. I think that many people of color will resonate with that, you know, as much as I try to get ahead in life, it seems like there's always something around the corner waiting to knock me down and make me feel like I'm not good enough. So I believe a part of it is that when you have people of color striving to do more, to improve their lives, we are often challenged by our own thoughts of not being good enough or not feeling like we belong because society has told us that we're not good enough and that we don't belong, right? So I said it before, I'll say it again, that if you have the media, social media, news outlets kind of portraying the person of color one way, and that's all you're seeing, why would you believe that you can be anything else if the society has already told you who you are, right? So I believe that's a part of the battle, is that what we're fighting against is we're trying to tell our own stories, but we're being faced with what majority entities might feel we are based on limited education, ignorance, stereotypes, all these other types of things. So I believe that we're up against rewriting the narratives and retelling the stories that need to be told by us, you know. I think having people like you and like me with platforms is super important because we are the faces of this thing and we're showing others that it can be done and it can be done the way that we want it to be done. It's super important that we empower ourselves and know you're not an imposter. Yes, you are good enough. Yes, you are smart enough. Yes, you are strong. Yes, you have what it takes. Yes, you can roll with the best of them. Who told you that you couldn't? Because that would be my question. Who told you that you couldn't do it? And why did you believe it? So that's my message right there, is that we challenge what society puts out there. We don't just believe it because society wants it to be true. That's for society to figure out. I'm going to tell my story. And I advise everyone else to do the same.
So, you know, with the psychological effects of that and how psychology works in itself, how would you psychologically look at society and culture that tries to reframe or change that narrative or that story for Black and Brown communities? Because
Yeah.
it's like they're throwing just the opposite. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like looking in the mirror. So I don't like myself. So let me throw this out, and this is what we put out.
Yeah, it is. I think what's often missed. So cultural competency, I would say, as when I started in the field, was when I believe that cultural competency was starting to get like a big momentum. I don't believe that, at least in my own upbringing, that there were many cultural considerations in terms of why someone could present with a specific behavior. I believe that is a big part of it. That what do we mean when we say cultural competency, right? What does that mean? I think that I always ask people these things, even if I think I have a meaning in my mind. I'm like, well, what does it mean for you? Because what's cultural competency for me can mean something different to someone else. So I believe that we really have to define what these things actually are. If we're going to say what cultural competency is, what does that mean? What does one have to embody to be a cultural competent therapist, I mean, a lot of times it's not being from the same side of the tracks as the person that you're meeting with. And that's certainly not a requirement to meeting with someone. But what you need to have is empathy to this person's experience, right? So if a client comes in and they say, yeah, this is my story and this was just really horrible for me. And then the response is, it couldn't have been that bad. That is, to me, a breach in cultural competency because you're minimizing my experience. So I think that a part of it is recognizing that we're not there necessarily to form an opinion on someone's story. We're there to help them work through what they believe their story actually is, and rather agreeing or not agreeing with how detrimental that experience was, we can recognize in a moment by what we can see and by what we hear that that was a very tumultuous experience for them nonetheless. So you have to be careful. Language matters. Have to be very, very careful not to try to minimize someone's story or downplay someone's experience just because we don't believe it's that big of a deal.
Right. Mental health stigma in the Black community is a real common, thing. It's real. It's a big barrier. How have you personally witnessed that stigma, and what strategies do you use to break it down?
Yeah, I believe the stigma exists when traditions should be more considered. There's a criteria. So whenever we have a client coming to us, we always assess for the presenting problem. What is, I always say, I don't like to use the word problem either. I say, what is the reason for why you're seeking support, right? How can I support you? How can I help you? That's the approach I take as opposed to what is your presenting problem? Or chief complaint is another word that's used when we're assessing someone for a diagnosis. So we always want to know why they're there. Why are you here? How can I help you? You have to look at the onset. That is when the presenting concern, the chief complaint, the reason for support would have begun. What was the issue that caused the person to want to seek therapy? Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 6 months, but we want to know a time frame. We also want to look at the frequency. We want to look at the frequency, how often, the intensity, how bad, like how bad is it, right? How bad is it impacting you? But also the duration. When you do have symptoms, how long is it lasting? Those are the 4 things that you want to ask when you are completing an intake assessment with a client. Oftentimes, we also have to, well, not often, always. You should always be asking about religion, spirituality, cultural practices, and rituals. This is something that is not all, sometimes it can be missed, right? If you're not taking the time to make sure that you're attuned to that. But if you're meeting with a client that comes from a different ethnic background than you, I find that it's super crucial that you're asking questions about religion, spirituality, rituals, and traditions. Why that is because if you don't know this client and they say, let's say I come from a family where, we believe that spirits, we sit down at the kitchen table and we share our dinner with spirits, right? That is not a diagnosis. That is a cultural belief. People believe that they talk to their ancestors. These things have to be carefully assessed, right? Are these a part of something that you come up to know in your life? Different cultures believe in different things. But if you're not careful, because of what a culture could believe, a client can be misdiagnosed very easily, misdiagnosed. If it's believed, okay, well, this client's talking about seeing this thing or that thing, and from someone who's not from that culture or don't understand how that culture has cultivated this belief over their generations, it's believed that this client has a diagnosis because this is something that they actually believe to be true. We know that, Native American culture, right? They believe in spirit guides and things like that. Would you give them a diagnosis of something that would suggest that they were delusional or having visual hallucinations because they believe in a spiritual ancestor that comes to them at night and offers them guidance? So you have to be careful. And I think, so for me, that's the big thing, is that we are careful, attention to detail, and we're careful and we're asking the right questions as providers who document this information.
Wow. So what role does intergenerational trauma play in the mental health challenges facing Black communities today, and how do you address it in your practice?
Oh, good, great question. So I just spoke about this recently, about trauma, and I believe that generationally, trauma can take impact, if behaviors that one would want to change or modify continue amongst generations. So the idea of keeping things within the household, and not speaking on things that kind of happen or impacted the family, that can be a contributor or a vulnerability that can speak to generational trauma. Think about it, it's this way. Eventually children grow up and become adults. um, Early attachment years, from birth to 4 years old, is when children are learning to cultivate attachment. They're learning how to express need, wants, gratitude, things like that, through parents giving hugs and feeding and spending time with them. So you learn the base of what you learn about relationships. You learn from home, your first household with mom, dad, or whatever the family makeup is. Based on those skills, you then, once you're old enough, you create your own household, and we subconsciously recreate the dynamic that we had when we were back home with our parents. If we're not aware of it, we're not always aware that we're doing it, but if this is the only way I've seen communication happen growing up, that's the way I'm going to utilize communication in my home, right? So because of that, it creates patterns of trauma that continue to carry on throughout generations, because throughout the generations, maybe family has learned only one way to communicate. Maybe family has learned only one way to express anger. Maybe family has learned only one way to express love, or like there might be abandonment concerns. So there's like a carryover, that kind of goes on as this family. Those kids grow up, they have their family. Those kids grow up, they have their family. And before you know it, you have generations of a family that have learned to communicate in the same exact way, but it's not a helpful way because their needs aren't being met, and they're experiencing heightened depression, anxiety, and all these other types of things. So a lot of the work that I do in my practice is I help the clients recognize that. We go back to the source, right? Sometimes it's creating a family genogram. Tell me about your family on both sides of the family. We often ask questions about what does trauma look like on both sides of the family as well, to give us some insight into how this client has learned to navigate depression, anxiety, and all these other types of social emotional concerns. But typically, that's it. Looking at the family unit itself and trying to correlate how the current dynamic, if it's not a family, even if it's with a boyfriend or girlfriend, husband and wife, how you recreated some of those same dynamics in your current situation.
Mm. You know what's interesting about that is, dynamics, it seems like everything is based on a societal situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about these dynamics, sometimes, people find themselves basically conforming and trying to fit in.
Yeah.
And so when I think about this, I think about the psychological trauma, impact, destruction of Black and Brown communities because of this crazy dynamic that's set up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I just wanted to say this in leading into this question, which is, how do you bridge the gap between academic psychology, which is often very Eurocentric in its foundations, and the lived realities of Black people in America?
Woo, loaded question. Love it. All right, like my favorite baked potato. Um, let's say this, right? So if you are very comprehensive, you should really touch upon all those areas. So in the first meeting you and I had here, I had talked about the 7 areas of wellness. That you have to look at each aspect of a person's life and assess how they're functioning on each area, 10 being the highest and satisfactory functioning, and then 1 being the least. That's spiritual, occupational, environmental, social, physical, emotional, and intellectual. That you are really getting a sense and assessing where the client is in every aspect of life in those areas. But also, I always assess for love language as well. We're talking about words of affirmation, gifts, quality time, acts of service, and physical touch. How have you learned to give and receive love? These are markers that help you to kind of assess where where someone is. A lot of times sometimes people don't know what their love language is. They know what they think it is, but then they say, well, when I'm with this person, it's this. When I'm with that person, it's this. So it definitely comes down to really helping a person define their personal identity. Not the identity that someone gave to them, but the identity that they want to take ownership of for themselves. So I'm comprehensive. I'm gonna ask you everything under the sun. That's why they call me Professor C, because it's gonna be a classroom by the end of it, right? I'm gonna ask you these very comprehensive questions because I really, really want to pin down everything that we need to know. Oftentimes my clients are like, I didn't even realize that I was functioning and at that level in this area. I didn't realize that this was something that I really enjoy over that thing. I always thought it was this that I enjoyed, but now I'm saying that that's never been true. So why did I think that in the first place? So that's what ends up happening a lot of the times, is that it's detective work. That just because a client tells you something doesn't mean that you don't continue to explore with them different outcomes, right? And even when clients come into my care, I always ask, like, what's your desired outcome? And then what's the alternative outcome? They're like, well, what's the alternative outcome if I'm telling you that this is what I want? I said, the reality is that if we can't get there, there has to be a middle ground, right? Because if in reality, we don't always get the exact thing that we want, but we learn to accept. Because a part of working through trauma, pain, adversity is accepting your circumstances, but not allowing those circumstances to define you. I always say that adversity, trauma, all these things that have been put on your path to set you back are not your identity. They're a chapter in your book. I stand by that. That, these things do not cultivate who you come to be. Maybe they help to shape, in some regard, opportunities that for growth, but that is not who you are. You are not your trauma. You are not your circumstances. You just had these circumstances, and it just so happened that you grew through those things, but that is not who you are. That's not your identity. So a lot of what you're saying, kind of looking at it from that lens, put things into perspective for clients. But it also speaks to the educational aspect as well, that I really take pride in the person's identity and their individuality. I want anyone who they see as a helper to help them cultivate experiences. If my client values birthdays, I'm hitting them up. I'm gonna make it a big deal. I know they love birthdays. I'm gonna hit them up. Yo, it's your birthday. We gotta make it a big deal because I know that client values that. If I have a client that values basketball, for example, maybe the therapy session is gonna happen on the court, right? Because therapy doesn't just have to exist in one environment either. That we really have to meet the clients where they're at and understanding environments where they thrive, right? It's about understanding where they thrive in life. So if it's on a basketball court, if it's on a football court, if it's at a dance recital, and we see like what they get from those areas, I want to pull that into the work that we're doing as a centerpiece. If you are a singer and you are the happiest when you're singing, that's going to be the centerpiece of your treatment. We're going to use that as the forefront, and we're going to pull everything else towards that, right? So we're talking about trauma. We're going to use music to talk about trauma. We're going to use dance to talk about trauma. We're going to use basketball to talk about trauma. We're gonna go from that perspective. So that is what I do. That's how I've been able to kind of cultivate experience for change that is rooted in empowerment, recognizing where someone is, but also allowing them room for growth. Not kind of putting them in a box, but letting them tell me where they think they can go.
What does culturally competent therapy mean to you? And why is it so critical that Black people have access to therapists who look like them and understand their experience?
Absolutely. Cultural competency to me means that we are taking the time to understand someone's story. I want to know everything about your story that you believe has shaped who you've become from your perspective. I think it is in recognizing that you don't always understand someone's experience, but it doesn't mean that you don't have an open ear, right? I always say this, right? If I don't understand a client's perspective, that does not mean that I can't work with them. Teach me. Any therapist who can tell your client, teach me, help me understand. That is showing empathy. That's showing that you care. That's validating that you care about what this client has to say. Cultural competency is about that. You want to hear about the unique stories from the lens of your client. That's why so often now in treatment plans, the therapists have to come up with a goal, but then there's a section that says, write that goal in the client's voice. How would the client say that goal? I think that treatment plans should be written into the client's voice because it speaks to their experience, and then healing should speak to their experience as well. That is cultural competency from the client's lens, using the client's language and helping them to cultivate and stand proud in who they are through their language, their traditions, their rituals, and everything else under the sun. You can say, I've never walked in your shoes, but I'm empathetic to your struggles. Teach me more.
Mm. You know, see that. I'll be honest with you. Whenever I go to see a therapist, because I do, and in doing all of the work that I do, I like to make sure that I try to stay about as free in the mind as possible, because there's a lot that's intertwined and interchangeable as to our communities, and a lot of that can be very traumatic.
Yep.
And the empathy and the sympathy that you speak of, as that's given out, I mean, that comes back as a reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people care like that, let's say even yourself, when you have those situations and you're putting your heart and soul into trying to help these people because you really want to do this, you like doing what you do, but that's just the real you.
Yeah.
How do you try to help to prevent a lot of this from actually coming in onto individuals or people in general that want to do this help, because that gets to be a lot?
It can be very overwhelming, right? I think that you have to be attuned to what the client is feeling in that moment. Even if you're trying to empower a client, they might not be in a place where they want to be empowered. So you have to know, any wise therapist would recognize that you have to really assess where that client is in that particular session. Sometimes they come in hot, right? Let me tell you. So you gotta be ready for that. But in that, you're like, okay, it's one of those. So you sit back. But oftentimes, they can come in and they don't know what to say, or they can't find the words that can speak to that experience for them. So it doesn't mean that we are necessarily filling in that void by giving them the words to say, but we're trying to help them name the emotions that they're experiencing, for one, that speaks to the experience that they've had. So if a client's coming to me and they're highly disappointed or sad, I use what's called the DBT behavioral chain analysis. It goes beyond looking at the behavior that you see in front of you, but looking at the patterns that contributed, patterns, triggers, and vulnerabilities that have fueled that behavior, right? So what's happening in that client environment at any given time? What type of patterns? Is it someone who cries every Wednesday when it rains outside? That's a vulnerability. Why does the client cry when it rains outside? Because the rain reminds them of a passed over loved one, right? Things like this. It happens all the time. So me, and other people who work in the field, I believe, have to be very attuned to like what's going on for the client by use of paraverbal communication, which means it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. It's recognizing that sometimes what the client can't say with their mouth, they're going to say with facial gestures, body language. They're going to say with isolation, withdrawal. Those things speak as well when they can't speak from their mouths.
Oh, wow. If you could change one thing about how psychology and mental health are taught and practiced in this country here, to better serve Black communities, what would it be?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately as well, and I think that we really should consider getting ahead of the curve on mental health concerns. Um, I think that when children nowadays are assessed for a lot of things in schools, they're assessed for ADHD concerns. They're assessed for autism and things of this nature. But rarely do things come up with regard to other mental health concerns unless the child has had a behavior in school that was problematic for the teacher. If a kiddo's coming in and, you know, they have a mismatched socks, or they might not smell like they took a shower or something along those lines, that is when there's a concern, right? I believe that when we're noticing these things, even the slightest kind of change in behavior, we should be asking questions. Not that everything is a problem, not that everything is a concern, but it shows that you care enough to ask those questions from the beginning and not waiting until the issue kind of blows up and it's out of control. I believe that a lot of times we practice to resolve an issue that has already been an issue for some time. I'm suggesting that we recognize what could be an issue before it actually becomes an issue. If you can recognize the signs that lead to increased mental health, aggressive outbursts, anger outbursts, depression, sadness, if you can recognize those signs from the beginning, we can take more preventative measures as opposed to being a solution focused agency in some regard. You know, if we can get ahead of the curve, we can catch it early. Early intervention is so important. I want to be on that side. I was on that side of things for a bit. I've done both. I've been on the early prevention. I was working in schools, but I've also been on the end of things where, you know, kids have been removed from homes through care and protections and truancy orders from a judge. I've been on both ends of the spectrum, right? So I've seen where kids, when they're just starting to develop those behaviors and might not even have a diagnosis. And I've seen the kids when they've had like chronic mental conditions and diagnosis. So another issue too is that we have to be careful with how we diagnose too, especially kids from a young age. It's a very tricky dance as a therapist or doctor, right? You have a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old coming to you. You really don't want to give that child a diagnosis, right? Because they are still in that early stage of development. But does it happen? It does. Sometimes you have a kid that's 7 or 8 and they have a diagnosis, right? They've been given a diagnosis by somebody. That stuff follows them. It follows them in school. It follows them sometimes beyond that, with being put on medications because they've been given a diagnosis. So I just think if we're very attuned to being early preventionists, that we can get ahead of the curve. That's super important.
You know, I was actually getting ready to move on, but I had a follow up for you on
Yeah.
that because, you know, when you think about, you know, kids in school and how they're doing all of this diagnosis and putting these kids on all these drugs and everything. How many times, to your knowledge, and I'm just asking this as to understanding,
Mm-hmm.
many times to your knowledge have you seen these schools that are diagnosing these kids and throwing them all these drugs, all this Ritalin and all that other stuff that's really screwing the kids up as they get a whole lot older, and the diagnoses are wrong?
That happens often.
And there's no consequences for it though, because they've screwed the child's mind up.
Right.
And so, in seeing that, I mean, is there anything that's being done that you know of when it comes to these schools and this education system? Because this system is out of control, actually.
Right. Right. It's great that you said that, because you're right. Sometimes the diagnosis can be a misdiagnosis. That's why I spoke to the mistrust, right, in the therapy field. So
Right.
not understand your experience. So having advocates for, it's twofold. So I'm gonna drop some gems here, but firstly, having advocates in the schools, so having more people of color working in schools that can work with some of other students of color that can recognize some of the behaviors, can be a voice to say we should try this and this before we move to medication. I'm not a big believer of giving kids medication at a young age. I'm just not. I'm gonna suggest that we do 3 to 5 things first. If those things don't work, and we try what we said, we can say without a benefit of the doubt that we gave it our best, then we can try medication, but not as a long-term solution, as a let's trial, let's see how it goes type, right? So anyone who comes to me, if I have kids coming into my care and their parents are considering medication, I'm always suggesting, well, let's hold off, let's schedule this amount of sessions first, to see what type of skill building we can do to decrease the intensity of that behavior. And then if we're not seeing changes in home and school, then we can talk about medication. Not that a kiddo is going to be put on it, but we're going to evaluate them for it to see if it could be a potential trial, not something that's supposed to be permanently set. So again, you know, if you're having therapists who are also school counselors, that's very common today. There's a lot of therapists who are also working in schools. You have school-based therapists. You have me, like licensed mental health therapist / school adjustment counselors. Just some different variations of a therapist / school counselor. It's important that we are in schools so that we can be the ones to kind of pose the questions to prevent kids being put on medications too soon. That is one aspect of it. There's another aspect here that happens too, right? That when these children are given a diagnosis, sometimes that is considered a disability. That's not really talked about often, but like ADHD, for example, could be deemed a disability, right? It's considered a health disability. It's not a mental health diagnosis. That's not something that I can diagnose a kid with, but a PCP person, a doctor would prescribe them with ADHD. That's considered a disability. I mean, even depression and anxiety sometimes, depending on the severity of it, is considered a disability. If the mental health diagnosis is impacting an area of functioning, it's considered a disability. There are some setbacks to that, but there's also benefits to that, because what happens if you have a disability, right? You get certain supports. It's problematic in some regard to me, because I always look at supports as something to serve as a stepping stone of support to get you to where you need to be, not something that should exist in permanency. But if you don't have advocates working with these families, right, to say, okay, we know that your child has this disability and you've been getting this support from the government for this amount of time, we want to try to, you know, move you away from that and get you to something else that's more appropriate. Those conversations often get missed. That's not happening. That's not happening. So parents sometimes or guardians can get accustomed to having certain supports through the government for this disability, right? Because it's helpful at times, but it's problematic because it's going to follow that child throughout their lifetime of having this disability and requiring this support from the government and that. So there's pros and cons to it, right? You can take the route of the holistic approach. Let's go through the many therapy sessions as we can and then decide what's appropriate to have a kiddo start medication, or let's diagnose them right away and then get them disability. I mean, get them, they get a legal disability and now they're getting support from, you know, social security services to support, you know, that disability that they have. You know, what message does that send to me? I ask that question. What message does that send long term? If we have someone who's on a disability, right, or receiving support for ADHD, if we could have did something different, and not have that family or that child feel like they have to rely on that support, that level of support for their condition.
Yeah, so with that being said, you know, I know there was one program that you spoke of in the beginning of the show that you wanted to touch on.
Oh, I had mentioned that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the mental movement. I mean, not the mental movement, the movement.
Okay, yes.
The movement.
And so what I wanted to do is, you know, I wanted to take that into connection with your work in community engagement and youth empowerment.
Yeah.
And so, can you first of all tell us about that
Yeah.
and how did that get to be?
Yeah. The movement came about because, you know, you gotta think I was in college. When I started college, it was like the end of 2006, 2007, right around there when I was a freshman in college. And at the time, you know, I want to say that the college really had this idea of trying to empower students of color to want to be on college campuses, especially a campus like Westfield State that was predominantly white. They were wanting more diversity. Let's get more students of color on this campus. That was the goal. The goal was to diversify the campus. I believe that the university has done a good job over the years of getting more students of color onto the campus. I do. I met a lot I have a lot of friends from there. Even people that didn't go through that intensive boot camp that I went through, that came in, matriculated through the generalized way of coming to the campus. It was good. But there were times when, let's just say, things got a little questionable, right? When I was a freshman, we were all put in the same building. I get the idea behind it. The idea was that, you know, we would be living with other students that came in with us. And, you know, if there was already a culture shock, if we were all living together, it might make the experience better or more comfortable to try to get through if we're all together, right? But think about like but right, if you're not thinking about the positive aspect, what would that communicate if you're putting everyone of color that went through this program in the same building on the same floor? I think that, so again, in hindsight, I know what it was intended to do, but what it was intended to do did not match what actually happened. So what ended up happening is that building ended up getting some nicknames when I was in that building, right? So me and some of the other students in that building were hearing that this building was called, when we were staying there, was called the zoo, the welfare building, the jungle. These were names used to describe that building that we were living in. So that was one strike, right? For me, being someone who's pretty, I would say that I'm pretty vocal when it comes to these things. So that was something. We had a whole meeting about that on the campus, but obviously it was just because other students that were there with us kind of came up with these nicknames because they thought it was cool at the time to call it the zoo, the welfare building, and the zoo. Okay. So that vandalism in areas where students of colors were staying, racial slurs being, you know, yelled when you're just walking to your car and someone's driving by with your friends and calling you out of your name. All these things were happening. So I just got fed up. I was the one in school that my friends always just be like, "Oh, Michael, shut up. Oh, Michael, don't say that. Oh, Michael, stop." I'm like, no. So I was always just very vocal and just kind of like, I'm going to say what I need to say. So I took it upon myself after the incident. Me and my friends were the ones walking to a car, and there were 4 students that weren't of color that yelled racial slurs out of their cars. I made a big statement. I wrote a article that got published in the front of the campus college newspaper. It was everything that I wrote verbatim. They just pretty much took my email that I sent and they published it on the front page. Every student, teacher, everyone under the sun saw that article, and it created this big like stir on campus. Who was this guy? They published this article. I had met with Joan Fuller before I did that. She was the director of the urban education program, and I told her what I was going to do. She was always that mother figure for us on campus. So I wanted to make sure that she knew, this is what I'm doing. Joan, Miss Fuller, this is what I'm doing. I'm letting you know, like, this is what I'm about to do. So she said, you do what you feel is best. You know, your voice deserves to be heard. So I did just that. From there, it got so much, it definitely created a uproar, not in a negative way though. People were coming like out of the woodworks to support. Professors coming to book buildings for students of color, marginalized, from marginalized groups to come together and speak about their experiences on campus. And I just remember walking into this building and everyone's looking at me and, here you go, Alan Michael. They gave me a mic. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And they said, we want you to talk. We want you to speak. And that is what, and I remember that, being nervous out of my mind, because I did not think that was going to happen, but it did. I remember walking up on that podium and being nervous. I'm like, thank you all for, it was such a huge turnout. There were so many people in this room, from teachers, students, parents. There were so many people in this room. And I'm this young kid, right? This college student. And they're like, we want to hear what you have to say. That was probably one of the most pivotal moments in my life because it made me realize that my voice mattered. From there, we had a second one of those meetings, and then we created the movement on campus to really fight against adversity, discrimination, and racism on campus. It kind of it kind of fizzled out once we graduated. But I want to believe that that was a very pivotal moment on that campus, that me and others who joined me, it wasn't just me. I was just the one kind of leading the charge, that we were going to be the ones kind of fighting against discrimination, microaggressions, racism, all these things, and just not going to sit quiet and let it happen. So that led to the movement being created. And I was reminded of that when I decided to create the mental movement, because now I still believe in fighting against those things, but now I have a mental health background to back it up.
So when it comes to that, and you know the premise and the foundation and the basis of the movement, what were you hoping that you would change when it comes down to creating the movement? And when you got the opportunity to speak, what was one of the things that you were thinking about that whole entire process as to what was that going to look like?
Right. I certainly wanted to feel like I belonged. One of the things I talk about in my practice when it relates to worthy of life is that in order for someone to feel like their life matters, they have to have a sense of belonging, activity, fulfillment, and a way to cope with negative emotions. But sense of belonging is important. That sense of community, right? I think I took on so many roles as a leader in so many ways on this campus is because I was trying to cultivate an experience of belonging for these other kids that were with me in these particular groups, right? I didn't really fit into a box. I belonged in I was a part of every group, right? That's still
Exactly.
how I am today. My saying is this: if you're skilled in every domain, you can appeal to every domain. It is my mission to make sure that I can connect with every single human being that I can come into contact with. Billy Joe with a guitar, I'm gonna be right there with you, bobbing my head. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, for me, it's about cultivating experience. Not that I'm trying to pretend to be something that I'm not, but that I am showing that I respect you and I honor you, where you come from, what you enjoy. It's not about me, right? It's about me honoring you in that moment. And then when it comes my time to be honored, I hope that someone will respect my background and honor me as well. So the whole premise behind the movement was to honor every single person on that campus, not just people of color, but also white students as well, because I had a lot of white friends in college. It wasn't we had white students on the step team with us that can get down with the get down. They had the moves. So it was like, for me, cultivating an experience where everyone could appreciate everyone's distinct differences and not vilify them for their differences, not try to put you in a box or believe that you are supposed to fit a statistic or stereotype because you saw something on TV or this rap video last week. That was my whole point of the movement, that we were going to challenge misconceptions that keep people divided on college campuses. My whole premise is to connect everyone together. It's not about being black, white, yellow. It's about appreciating that you're black, white, yellow, and that we can all stand together for the benefit of growth, gain, prosperity, abundance. There's room for everybody at the table. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, but it's a problem when you decide that you're going to vilify people from marginalized communities or say that their lives don't matter as much as the majority. That's problematic in so many ways. And it's not about one life mattering more than the other. Also heard, people say, well, why is there a Black History Month? That has been said before. Well, because, because we do need something, because Black people fight every day to be seen. Black people do work 10 times as hard as their counterpart to be seen, heard, valued, right? So of course we want to make sure that we are honoring our community and where we've come from, and recognizing that we've been up against a lot of adversity. Over 400 years of slavery, when reading was taboo. Someone like me is not supposed to exist. Imagine me jumping in a time machine and going back to the time when I'm not supposed to read. I'd be probably running for my life, right? So it's just like you got to think about that, right? The things that I'm able to do now would have got me killed decades ago. It's not supposed to be possible. I've had supervisors tell me, you're not supposed to exist. Like a black man and a therapist, like articulate, that's unheard of, right? It's like we're a unicorn, so to speak. So kind of fighting against that is providing representation and saying that anyone else who feels like they have a unique story and that they want to feel empowered and they want to make an impact in communities, take a seat at the table. And I'm gonna hand you the mic, just like somebody handed me the mic. This is me handing you the mic. Let's do this together.
Well, you're right about that because actually now we've gone to the point now where we're actually owning a lot of tables. And
Absolutely.
so I think that that's very, very important because we need to keep owning as many tables as possible. And when it comes to where we can offer the seats, oh, you can have a seat. No, you can't have a seat. You know, that's very important
Mhm.
because, and it's not about the being exclusionary. It's about for going through all of these times of where things have been taken away
Right.
is what's so important about this because these folks that created this system, they understood what that system was. And I know that as time went and we're now here in the 21st century, that it was evolving to change. So I think the evolution of coming to the change has been the major, major problem.
Right.
So now we're going back to this point where we're trying to push time back to
Mhm.
1955, but we're in the 21st century.
Right.
How are we going to do that? I don't know, but they're trying to find a way. But I don't think time is going to let that happen.
Right. Right.
But I think when it comes to what you're doing with the movement, because I really do love that. And what I wanted to ask you about, as I say, as it relates to your work with community engagement and with youth empowerment, is if you can intertwine that with this question. Describe the community engagement work you do, and what does it look like on the ground, and who are the communities and young people you're working with most closely?
Okay. Great question. So, obviously, everyone knows that I am very big on the arts, singing, dancing, instruments, and with the mental movement. If you were following my TikTok or YouTube, you'll know that every week I release something new, and it might be a song, it might be a spoken word poem, it might be a dance, but it's something that speaks to empowerment. It's something that fights against social injustice and adversity. From that lens, when I am working with individuals, I am trying to help them cultivate what would be deemed their mark on this world, what they feel empowers them, what they feel makes them great, what they feel are their unique strengths. So that is one in one regard. I am picking up momentum by I'm trying to travel more to different states, and I like to cultivate a stage where I can perform, and then we can have some type of discussion afterwards to talk about the significance of that performance, right? So something I've done is called the cultivation of awareness, being something that speaks against segregation and police brutality in this country, which we know has always been at an all-time high. And we say their names, but after we say their names, then what happens? So this is an experience that I continue to bring home: is that what do we do after we say their names? What happens when the audience of the protest goes home? What's next? So those being some aspects, and then the makings of a good leader. I have actually too. I've been kind of fighting against keeping those things up and running because some force is trying to silence me, but that's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
In terms of being able to speak about these things, so it's just so happens that now that I'm getting up, my following is growing or whatever. I'm being kind of getting pushback on promoting the cultivation of wellness that speaks about police brutality and segregation and politics in this country, and leadership in this country, and people being appreciated for their differences and feeling like their culture matters. That So I'm fighting against that right now. So I feel like as much as possible I need to be visible by going, when I can travel, go to places to speak to different groups, go to universities. I am scheduled to go to a university soon to speak, to empower students to find their unique voices and to make impacts in communities and figure out what their lane is. So that's one way I'm giving back, right? In the sessions, in the community, going to these different universities, performing in these different venues, trying to get people, trying to bring more and more people in so that they recognize that they do matter, and that I value their voice. I value your voice. I value your uniqueness. I value everything about you. I value your hair follicles, everything about you. I value it, because you matter. And I'm going to make sure that you know that. If you're with me, you're going to know that Professor C cares and that he's not afraid. He's not afraid to put on that hat to be the forefront man for some of the things that we are facing.
Mhm. So when you walk into an underserved community, what do you see that most people overlook? And what do you believe those communities need most that is rarely offered to them?
Mm-hmm. So let me say this, right? If we're saying that commu- if we're saying that it's a system thing, let's go back to some of the origin of family systems. So what happens in a family therapy session often, if you're working with individuals in the family, you're not just going to work with the family all together. You're going to work with them individually, and then you're going to work with them together. But not just together, you're also going to figure out what's happening in that system. This means that you're going to assess what are the norms, or what are the norms that they've come to know as the things that they should and would be doing, because there's some force that told them that this is what you do, right? So I like to believe that I don't just look at the individual or the family. I look at the system that was broken from the start, because you can't just look at the parent and be like, oh, it's the parent's fault that this child ended up this way, or that this child has this trauma. What about the parent's trauma? And how did that parent end up being traumatized that passed it on to the child? What type of system that exists in this environment that makes for trauma to continue on in that way, right? A lot of it has to do with adversity. It's lack of resources, lack of support, lack of understanding, lack of trust, because you don't have someone looking like you or I that can show them that, there is a path that can be taken, right? So if you don't know better, how can you do better? Often the
Right.
system is designed to teach you that there is no better, that what you get is what you get. And that is what I feel that people of color have come to accept, that this is my reality. It's not going to get better than this. This is how it's always been. Who decided that it had to stay that way just because that's the way that you're used to seeing it? I say, I'm going to call you bluff on that, right? I'm not going to believe that this is the way that it has to be because someone told me that it needed to be that way. So I'm empowering others to think outside of that box as well. Now, if you have a broken system, if you remove everyone who exists within that broken system, what happens to the system? If there's no one in the system to run the system, what happens to it?
Mm. So it's that look, that's the end of that system, is what that is to me.
Correct.
And if that's the end of that system, and when a new one is created, it's created without all of those barriers.
Correct.
That's what I think is the is what causes fear. And it causes fear because when you have mistreated people and took away from people for over 400 years, where now you don't have that at your beck and call anymore, that's the scary part. Oh wow, is this going to happen to me now?
Right.
That's the thing.
Facts. Absolutely. Absolutely. So think about a guinea pig or a rat even in a cage running on that little wheel.
Right.
You put like the food you put the food on there and just hang in or whatever, and they keep running to try to get it, right? Let me dangle a
Yes.
carrot. The system is designed with dangled carrots.
Yes.
I'm gonna give you enough to believe there's hope that you can get out of this system, but I'm actually never gonna give you the tools to get out of the system. I'm gonna make you believe that you can, but I'm not gonna give you what you need to actually do it.
Mhm. Yep. So when we talk about youth development is central to your mission. What do you say to a young Black kid who doesn't see a clear path forward, who feels like the system was not built with them in mind?
Yeah, I would really try to cultivate recognizing what makes that kid smile. Like, what's the reason for why that kid chooses to wake up beyond a parent saying, get up, get ready for school? What did you enjoy within the day that speaks to your purpose? I've always told people to pour back into your cups. That self-care is about pouring back into your cup. And then once the cup overflows, you can then pour back into the cup of others. But that care really starts with you. That in order for you to show up as the best version of yourself to give to others, you have to really pour back into your cup. But for me, cultivate experiences to where we teach our youth to pour back into their purpose. When I was young, it's like being old school back in the day. Parents used to say, "Oh, my child's going to be a doctor. My son's going to be leading the NBA," right? Parents kind of dream. They have this thought in their head for what they believed that you were capable of being, not because they wanted to put you in a box, but because they believed in you. They believed you had the skill set to do it. My mom always used to say back then, before I started singing, that she wanted me to become a doctor. That was her thing. You know, Michael's going to be a doctor. He's so smart. That was a thing that she used to say back in the day. And then I started the whole music journey and got away from it. So then she started to think something else. But now I'm putting it all together, right? I want to be the doctor and the singer. I want it all. So I think for me, helping youth get to that place to where they realize that the only limits that they have is the limits that they set for themselves.
That makes so much sense. That
Right?
makes so much sense. Yeah. What role does mentorship play in the transformation of Black youth, and how are you actively working to increase access to high quality mentorship in your community?
Yeah. So I began working with other entrepreneurs and leaders. There's a few groups that I've been working with. Actually, there are parents who are also coaches, or there are parents and guardians who belong to organizations that support Black and Brown youth, especially our boys. Kind of coming up, you know, men of color, kind of supporting boys of color being a thing. Just last week, I did a podcast. You've heard of it. I did a podcast on talking about men, right? Black men in this country, and especially speaking to the experience of the youth. I believe that right now, I'm trying to really increase my contacts with those leaders who have access. I used to do a lot of work when I was working full time in schools. I used to help in that way. Like I would help the youth through after school programming, but I'm not doing that anymore. So now I'm trying to find a more creative way to support the youth that are not necessarily clients of mine. So there have been talks about me doing some volunteer work with other agencies that have like these programs that boys can attend that speak about mental health and empowerment, in other ways just to support their growth. So that is still a work in progress. Right now, more directly though, I'm working with parents who have young boys of color and kind of helping to cultivate experience in that way. Also still maintaining some contact with agencies that I used to work with in the past that have youth of color that might need some mentorship or some guidance in how to work with particular youth. I think I mentioned last time that I did a training with some of my staff on we did an actual PFP, me and my supervisor at the time, on how to do this Black girl's hair, right? So we had to do a formal training on it, and then we created a document, typed it up, everything. So it's sad that sometimes that you have to go there, but in my experience, that's what I see, that there is a lack of kind of knowledge and education and how to work with students of color just because of lack of exposure. It's not because of, a lot of times it's not for any other reason, just because you might have let's say you have a white student who just graduated from college and they decide to work for a nonprofit organization and has a program full of Black kids, right? A lot of times, sometimes they don't know how to necessarily work with kids of color because they never really had that much exposure to kids of color. So I think that's a huge part of it, is that we're paying attention to that, and we're not vilifying them because they don't know. We are giving them the tools to be able to support students of color and maintain cultural competency.
Well, the final question for you.
Yeah.
How do you balance the demands of running a business and maintaining a public platform while still showing up physically and emotionally for the communities you serve?
Yes, I'm big on my faith, and I believe I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. That God has given me the tools to be able to cultivate experiences for impact and change. I have a mantra, I have a prayer. Meditation is big for me. I do it every day. I meditate every single day. I'm always asking God to guide my steps, guide my mind, guide my heart, guide my spirit, guide my words, guide my soul. That, you know, I am creating a spiritual framework to where I recognize that I can do all things through Christ, through God, right? I believe in a higher power. I believe that God has called me to this work, and I significantly believe that this is my purpose. So I'm going to show up from the time that I wake up to the time that I go to bed. I'm going to give it my all. You'll never get a half step out of me, because it's beyond me. It's about impacting others to come after me. This work is about creating legacy. So, I really challenge everyone who has a platform, who is a leader in their own right, who's running a business, to really create opportunities for the youth to grow, for them to get that sense of belonging and feel like that if the table isn't designed for them, they never needed it in the first place, when they could just simply create their own.
Yeah. So, in closing, what are some words of wisdom and encouragement that you'd like to leave with our audience? How to connect with you via your social media, your websites, how to get your books, all of those good things, your music included.
Oh, geez. Okay. Yeah. So the words that I would say that I like to leave everyone with is train, empower, lead. Those are my words that I want to leave with. And then in terms of getting in contact with me, I have 3 emails. Chest89, that's A as in the first letter of my name, Chest, my last name, CHEST, 89@gmail.com, or Chest Alan Michael @gmail.com, or pcmentalmovement@gmail.com. For TikTok, I'm TikTok at Visions of Professor C. My website is www.thevisionofprofessorc.com. And music is www.reverbnation.com/Alan Miko. That's ALLANMIKO, Alan Miko. You will find my music there. In terms of my published works, I still have a lot of stuff in works that I'm not necessarily promoting just yet, but please be on the lookout when I do put things out. If you want to get an idea of what I'm putting out, my TikTok and my YouTube page would be a good place to find some of the creative stuff that I have been working on that speaks to a lot of things that I spoke about today in terms of adversity, making positive impact, fighting against social injustice, improving mental health for everyone, and cultural competency. That these are things that are very dear to my heart, and they show up in every single thing that I do, through my music, through my mental health, and beyond.
So, can you stick around after I close the show for a few minutes?
Yeah.
I want to thank our audience for watching and being a part of this great, extraordinary show. Again, this has been more than just an educated class. This is a master class. And this is something that I think for each and every underserved and marginalized community, you need to get the understanding of what we need to do to stay mentally focused and sharp, because we have to be vigilant about how we live and the things we do, but also how we move forward. For those of you that have been watching on all of our channels, including our YouTube channels, if you have not yet subscribed, I ask if you would please support us by subscribing to our channel, as well as enabling all notifications, where you'll be able to get all of the shows live when we go live, as well as going back and check out all of the previous episodes of all the great works of all our leaders that have been here. So in closing the show, this is like, wow. Just wow. That was really great. We real appreciate what you did. That is why we do this. That is exactly why we built America in Black and White, because conversations like the one we just had with Professor C, Alan Michael Chest, are not just entertaining. They are necessary, they are healing, they are fuel. Tonight, we talked about the courage it takes to become an entrepreneur when the system was not designed with your success in mind. We talked about what it means to heal, really heal, as a Black person in America. We talked about the power of psychology and the responsibility that comes with using your knowledge to lift others. We talked about giving back to communities that need more than good intentions. They need people who actually show up. Professor C is one of those people, And after tonight, I hope you feel that too. And we cannot leave without circling back to our brother, Hugh Masekula. Hugh left his homeland for 30 years, but he never stopped playing his song. He never let exile silence him. He turned pain into platinum and protests into anthems that outlived apartheid itself. That's the energy I want you to carry out of this episode. Whatever you're going through, whatever systems is trying to box you in, silence you, or hold you back, pick up your trumpet and play louder. This is American Black and White, Season 4, Episode number 91. And we're not done if this episode moved you. And I believe it. I believe it did. Subscribe, share it with your people, leave a comment, and let us know what hit home for you. Your engagement keeps this platform alive and growing. We do this for this community. We do this for you. I'm your host, Charles King. Remember who you are. Remember where you come from, and never stop reaching for what you were born to be. We'll see you the next time. God bless you and stay excellent. We'll see you tomorrow for another great episode at 6 p.m.